This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Razib Khan with the Unsupervised Learning podcast. And today, this is definitely unsupervised learning because we're going to talk with Dr. Mark Lutter, who is a PhD from George Mason, and he is the founder and executive director of the Charter Cities Institute. And I've known about charter cities. I'm friends with you, Mark, and my friend Patry Friedman, or some people will say Patry Friedman, Milton Friedman's grandson, who's been involved, I think, on the edge of this movement. And I think most people know about charter cities from something like some controversies related to the government of Honduras, basically these are like libertarian-ish ideas. And they've been around, I think, 20 years now. You can correct me in the history. It seems like there's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, a lot that's going on here. So it's kind of incrementally. I feel honestly, I think it's a good time to talk to you actually, in terms of the podcast. You were like, hey, you should, talk about charter cities. And that, if you had asked me that 5 years ago, I'd be like, I don't really know if it's something that's on people's radar yet. But I do feel in 2024, I don't know why, but I do feel like this sort of stuff is on people's radar. Probably partly it's American governance, but we don't need to get into that. So I feel like this is the beginning of not necessarily a renaissance, but the beginning of the rise of charter cities as a concept, as an idea, which is like a new form of governance, new form of organization. And in some ways, I think they've been around for a while. If you're think about free cities or something like that in the Middle Ages, right? So talk about what a charter city is and what you're doing. So let's just give the listeners a quick intro.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. So yeah, I mean, charter cities, right? Like free cities, self-governing cities are one of the oldest forms of human organization. You've got the free cities in Europe. Obviously, you have Venice. Before empires, you had to have cities, and the cities tended to be self-governing at that time. So it's not a new form of social organization. Kind of the modern charter city concept was originated. There's 2 streams of thought, right? One came from Paul Romer. I think he gave his TED Talk in 2009. He's a Nobel laureate in economics. And he approached charter cities from this kind of economic development angle, where the argument being, look, one of the primary reasons some countries are rich and other countries are poor is governance. Governance, right? If you take a random Honduran, move them to the United States, per capita income in Honduras is about $2,500 a year. You just cross the border to the U.S., right? They'll be making $20,000, $30,000 a year. Some of that is capital, some of that is labor market, but a lot of that is just governance, is that the governance allows for these things to exist. It's very difficult to change governance at a national level, but if you can change it at a local level, particularly given there is very rapid urbanization in many parts of the global south. Africa, for example, will add 1 billion new urban residents over the next 30 years. And so these people need new places to live. So you can combine this rapid urbanization with improved governance. You change economic growth rates by 1-2 percentage points, right? Over a 30, 40-year time horizon, that compounds. That leads to very substantial differences in income. So that was Paul Romer's strand. Then you had what might be called the pushing the frontier strand. This was Patry Friedman. He founded the Seasteading Institute, I believe, in 2008. And the idea, one of the memes they propagated, is America runs on 250-year-old code, right? And if you have a company, you want to update the company, you want to update the bylaws, you want to make things work a little bit better. And is America, right? We're still kind of the world leader in most technology, innovation, all that good stuff. But our governance obviously needs a lot of improvement. And with seasteading, the idea was, look, there's a lot of ocean. The ocean has a relatively weird set of rules governing it that are a lot more open and flexible than if you're in a country. And if you can find a way to get floating platforms for cheap enough, you can do really cool, innovative stuff on the ocean, right? And so these two different strands, right? Romer was an economist. It's more focused on mainstream development stuff. You had a lot of kind of early interests like Financial Times, The Economist, New York Times, right? Patrick Friedman, even though his grandfather was Milton, came from like Silicon Valley world. Peter Thiel was one of the founding donors to the Seasteading Institute. So it had much more of this entrepreneurial kind of ethos embedded. And over the last 15 years, there have been a lot of developments, but I can pause there or I can keep talking, whatever makes sense.
Well, so I mean, the Romer, I know, I know Patry, personally. I've known him. Well, I've known him since like 2008. More like as an acquaintance. Now he lives in Austin. We're good friends. So I know, some of that. The Romer project, though, like, yeah, it had like I remember it was in like Slate and the New York Times. Like it kind of, and Romer's a big deal. You allude to it as an economist. I know he's like a brilliant theoretician. This is it's not like economists are not like physicists. They're not like, the Dick Feynman, everyone. You know what I'm saying? Romer is, he's like the Paul Samuelson or whatever. I want to emphasize this is not just some economist that, we're used to economists that like, work for like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and they're okay. But like this is actually an intellectual giant in the field in the in the over the last 50 years. So he let an incredible amount of credibility. Like, I know him from endogenous growth theory. I had a period where I would read about that. And so he worked in that area. And then like he's talking about charter cities. But it turned out to be a fiasco, right? Like that's what I remember. So talk
Yeah.
about what happened there.
Yeah. So he does the TED talk. He gets invited, right? Huge amount of attention, huge amount of publicity. He gets invited to Madagascar, meeting the Madagascar uh, president, prime minister, I don't remember which, right? And a few weeks after I think they publicly announced something, there's a coup. And the coup is unrelated to Paul Romer being there. It's because the Madagascar government was giving away a bunch of land to a South Korean, I think they were agricultural kind of developer. Um, but it is related to the extent that, like, this is one, government countries often don't like to attract a lot of foreign capital because it comes with control and other conditions and influence that oftentimes angers the local population. And then two, illustrates one of the kind of central tensions of charter cities, where they can often provide the most benefit to a country that lacks rule of law, that needs this type of investment. But by definition, right, that political uncertainty makes it a lot more difficult to execute on a charter city and attract the capital and create the conditions for sustainable growth, right? So after Honduras, Paul Romer goes to, after Madagascar, he goes to Honduras, and there are different sides of the story. If you ask the Hondurans like already had this idea for basically a charter city, and they call Paul Romer in to come and give them like air support and legitimacy for their idea. If you ask people probably in Romer's camp, it'll be okay, this was his idea, and they're jumping on. So anyway, he goes to Honduras. They pass legislation. Um, then they end up. They were supposed to set up a transparency body. They do not set that up. The government signs an MOU with a private group. Paul Romer's like, "Where's the transparency body? I was supposed to be on it." He resigns. He actually sent the kind of notes to Tyler Cowen. They're still on Marginal Revolution. If you want to read, I think this was 2011. Um, and then like a week or two after he resigns, the Supreme Court rules it unconstitutional, right? And at this point, Paul is like, "All right, fuck this. I tried." He got a incredible amount of criticism. Like everybody was calling him a neo-colonialist. Everybody was like, "You're not everybody, but a large amount of people were like, you're evil, you're bad." And he's kind of a academic, right? He's not used to these types of fist fights. And so I think that ended up kind of cautioning him on his willingness to kind of put himself out there. Um, Honduras later passed legislation that did not get overturned by the Supreme Court, which is why you have these projects in Honduras now. The one your listeners are most familiar with is probably Prospera, which launched publicly in either 2000 or 2000 or 2020 or 2021. I don't remember which. And so you've had kind of a few of these strands, a handful of organizations, my organization, the Charter Cities Institute. You've got Prospera, you've got Patrick Friedman, I think in 2018 launched Pronomos, which is a investment fund, seed stage venture capital fund. You have the Free Cities Foundation, which is kind of doing this, but with a like very kind of libertarian approach. Um, so you've had these kind of things percolating. It does feel that it's somewhat close to a breakthrough, right? If you look, industries are legitimized when they have like an exit or a major win, and like Charter Cities has not had that yet, right? You've got projects, Prospera, you've got some other ones, Ciudad Morazan, but these aren't like printing money for the investors. The Honduran government is currently trying to kill the charter city projects in Honduras. You've got other projects that are kind of like adjacent, overlapping, but no like really obvious thing where it's like open AI, everybody's talking about it. This is obviously working, right? Like for fintech, right? Like Stripe, super successful. 3 years later, you see a bunch of other fintech companies that legitimizes the entire fintech space. And we haven't seen that with charter cities. It feels like we might be getting close, but it's also a little bit uncertain. And two, because charter cities are so kind of geographically focused and regional, right? You get a success in one. Like even if Honduras was a major success, how many people in Africa care about Honduras, right? Like maybe other people in Central America, maybe South America. That's not really going to spill over to Africa. It's just like too distant, and Honduras is too small a place to influence conversations a continent over.
Yeah, yeah, so, I mean, eh, one of the things which you mentioned in the introduction is it's really interesting because, I think some people think of charter cities as this novel idea, but, they've been around for a while. We just didn't call it charter cities or free cities, whatever. In a way, like, the original arguably the original germ of political organization, um, you you know, after the Ice Age was probably a charter. I mean, it didn't have a charter, but, like, the local farmers would be like, a town would grow up and whatever, right? And there was no state. The state later came, after that. But now the issue here is, like, the state is basically the central way we organize politics, the nation state. And, I think of the charter city movement as a way to kind of like diversify our portfolio. We've gone through this. We're in a Westphalian moment. Treaty of Westphalia, for the people don't know, is just like ended the 30 Years' War, and basically it created this like diplomatic system in Europe in the late 17th century that continued during the Napoleonic Wars and into the modern world and served as the basis for like modern diplomacy and how states interact with each other. So it's contrast, for example, with like the Chinese system where China has tributary missions and all that stuff. The Westphalian system, each nation state is it's kind of fake, but they act like they're equals, right? But these are the legitimating like units of organization. Can you talk about like how you can get through to people, or like what your experiences are with talking to people who just like come to the table with not understanding how there could be any other way?
Yeah, so we're kind of we take the boring charter cities approach, right? We're not trying to create like independent political units. The way we frame this is, look, right? Countries often they'll have like national goals where it's like in the next 20 years we want to build million housing units and create 2 million jobs and blah blah blah, and they'll write these down and sometimes they'll follow them, right? These will be kind of the guiding principles of a country. And so what we'll do is we'll look up these documents, and then when we meet ministers or heads of state, we say, look, you want to do X, we want to help you do X, right? Y is a good strategy to help you do X, where Y is, let's create a partnership. Um, let's figure out how to, right, improve business registration, how to improve tax collection, how to improve kind of hiring, how to improve land registration, like all these things, right? And most of the governing elite in these countries are aware of these challenges, right? These aren't stupid people. They know that they face these challenges. And the real question is, can you go in with enough credibility and with a good enough plan to partner with them that you get this kind of devolution of power to a area? And it's not just devolution, right? You can create the best legal system in the world. If it's in Antarctica, nobody's going to move there. So occasionally I run to people who it's like, yeah, here's this Pacific island that's like in the middle of nowhere, and it's a 3-day boat ride from the nearest airport. It's like, great. If you get control over that, who cares, right? So you need this kind of combination of what is the right governing system, right? You're going to want a different governing system for, let's say, the US than like a town in sub-Saharan Africa, just because they're at vastly different levels of development, right? So what is the right governing system? Where is the land? What is the partnership agreement with the local host country and other relevant political institutions? Uh, Most of the challenge there's definitely some I don't know, ideological pushback challenge. But most of the challenge we have, I think, now is a bit more around execution. It's like, okay, how do you actually finance these things and underwrite it? How do you get enough land to justify the initial infrastructure build out? How do you actually structure the partnership with government in a way that it's stable over the long term? And the government doesn't say, like, in 5 years, hey, we're getting screwed, we're going to squeeze you, or you start off with an agreement that's predisposed to the government, so you can't raise the capital, right? So it does feel like we're like in the early stages of this implementation of this execution in terms of like, yeah, what do these varying aspects look like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess one way that we could think about this and what you're alluding to here is the Westphalian nation state. It's kind of a one size fits all. It obviously emerged, I alluded to the 17th century. It emerged at a specific time and place to solve specific problems. Um, I'm not, like Thomas More wrote Utopia. Like, there are people who have futuristic ideas even back then. I'm pretty sure if you ask those people that were, getting the Treaty of Westphalia done, if you ask them, "Oh, do you think that this system that you're setting up right now is gonna cover the whole world in 250 years or 300 years?" They would probably think you're crazy. So it's a little bit of historical contingency, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, another way to think about it is if you think like, right, there's multiple ways of framing this, and it also depends on, I think, where in the world you are. So if you look at China's economic growth over the last 40 years, it's basically been entirely urbanization and special economic zones. So Shenzhen is basically a charter city, right? When the Chinese government created the special economic zone of Shenzhen, it was not like 10 acres, right? It was 320 square kilometers. It was a shitload of land. And it was not just like, here, Shenzhen, you can have some tax breaks. They basically said, other than national defense, post office, railways, like one or two other things, you can do whatever you want in Shenzhen. So it was not proscriptive, it was not limited. Then basically the Shenzhen City Council, they pioneered a market in land, they pioneered a market in labor, they pioneered financial markets that later spread throughout the rest of China. So there it was a right in China, what it was basically like they could not pass these reforms in all of China. They not even know exactly what reforms needed to be passed, right? They knew they needed a different system. This was a one kind of way to pass reforms that otherwise couldn't have been passed because of political concerns, right? You can't do it in Shanghai, the traditional commercial capital, because there are too many capitalists there and the communists wouldn't let that happen. But Shenzhen was a backwater, right? And then two, you wanted a small scale experiment to figure out what works. Uh, Another analogy you can kind of draw on is the Hanseatic League, right? The Hanseatic League was a set of Germanic city states in the kind of late medieval, early modern era. It was created in the 12th century. The last one kind of formally dissolved in the 19th century, but it kind of hit its peak in the 14th, 15th century, right? And there, what you had, a lot of these were in the Holy Roman Empire. So you did have this like larger political unit, but the political unit itself was like fairly weak, right? Weak taxing authority, weak enforcement authority. And you also had, at this time, there was urbanization happening in Europe with increased trading networks. So basically, with this urbanization and the increased trading networks, the reason the Hanseatic League was created was they need enforcement mechanisms for trade. They need governing bodies for these towns, and right, that was the result of right. And so, right, like these aren't some like utopia, like universal. This is how everybody should live, right? Like governance is a tool that people develop to live better and more harmoniously together. And different conditions, I think, require different solutions for that governing tool. And as we're seeing now, the current governing tools are failing on several respects, and we should think about like alternatives in different contexts that might help on different margins to kind of govern ourselves better and live together more effectively.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and just I'm just gonna like, fill in for the listener. You're talking about Shenzhen. That's basically the area around Hong Kong, Guangdong, and like Southeast China. That's something you've heard about. And that's basically the beginning of the special economic zones. That's the beginning of 20th century, late 20th century Chinese capitalism that eventually spread across the whole coastal zone. And it was a successful experiment. And so, Chinese communists are like, okay, like let's do this then, right? Basically, it was an experiment, and
I mean, the quote that Deng Xiaoping kind of that encapsulates it is crossing the river by feeling the feet with or feeling the stones with my feet. So it's like, look, we need to know we get across the river. We don't know exactly how to do that, and you can read histories, and it's like fascinating. Where like the reason they have a labor market is because there were basically right investors in Hong Kong who wanted to create a hotel, and so they're like, okay, they hired a bunch of women, and they're like, all right, you need to do the sheets, and you should wear makeup. And the women were like, no, it's capitalist to do the sheets more than once a week. And it's capitalist to, right, like use makeup. And the solution was, we will give you more money if you do the sheets daily and wear makeup. And the women were like, okay, yes, now it's capitalist, but right. And so there is this like very granular learning process in terms of like what does it actually mean to create like these markets in a system that's tried very systematically to stamp them out over the last 30 years. And the explosion in Shenzhen was just absurd, right? Within 4 years of its creation, it had the tallest building in all of China. So you basically have what's a handful of fishing villages, a total population of 100,000 people, but each individual fishing village had like at most 30,000, right? And at the time, Chinese population is what, 600, 700 million. They developed the nuke in 67, I think. So you have these backwater fishing villages that in 4 years from this change in the rule set has literally the tallest building in all of China. Like modern Chinese history does not look the same without that special economic zone, which like functionally is a lot more equivalent to a charter city in Shenzhen.
well, I mean, so it seems to me, I mean, one thing that I would wonder about is, you know, okay, so charter cities. Yeah, this is my intuition. It will be easier to get them set up in kind of like a developing weak state society where, they're like, okay, let's experiment, whatever. There's fewer like bureaucratic entrenched interests that have enough power. It could be like some big man, some I'm just call it kleptocratic, right? So that's what like okay, do it, right? Um, but if it succeeds, it seems like the problem would be like how do you prevent it from like takings to occur? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the expropriation risk is if you talk to any kind of person interested in investing in a charter city, expropriation risk is always the first thing that comes up. And there's no silver bullet for this, but there's several bronze bullets. So one just like basic metric is look, there are very capital intensive investments in poor countries already, right? Like that exists. That's proof of concept on some margin. And those are almost exclusively resource extraction. And why do those exist? Basically, a series of international treaties that allow you to protect the legal rights of the investor, where if the host country expropriates them, the investor can expropriate if and the right they will take the expropriator to court, the country to court, and if the investor wins that court battle, they can take the overseas assets of the country, and other courts will enforce that. So let's say you build a charter city in, I don't know, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or you build an oil well, Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC takes it, you can sue them, and then you can, right, take assets from that in other countries. And if they've got a ship in Italy, you go to Italy, you say, here's the court order, I want that ship. You take it, then you sell it. So you've got those legal protections. If you hit those legal fights at that point, kind of if you're a charter city, you've already basically lost, right? Because even if you win those legal fights, even if you get recoupment for your investment, right? Like the city project itself is pretty close to dead. Just because like attracting investment, attracting people to move there is going to be extremely difficult because you've got this massive legal uncertainty hanging over your head. I think the way you get around that is severalfold. One, right? Like this only works as part of a like local elite coalition. What that means in practice is you need to find out, right? Like governments are not unitary, right? Governments are made up of a different set of competing interests and different elite groups and blah, 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 right? So you find some and figure out, okay, we get them to invest. Maybe they own equity in the land. Maybe they own equity in the operating company, right? Maybe they invest like, I'm going to build a factory in this town. So that way, the political elite in the country have a vested interest in the success of the project, right? Two, you can structure it in a way where you get capital flows from development finance institutions. This is like the World Bank, African Development Bank, etc. And oftentimes, these institutions will have more than one lending arm out to a country, right? They might be investing in a road here, a dam here, a school there, whatever, right? So let's say they've got four investment arms out to the country, right? You're the fifth. That way, if the government screws with your project, they're also risking capital flows to three or four other projects, right? And so the general point being, yes, there is no silver bullet. Expropriation is always a risk, but we live in a fairly interconnected world. And it is, as we're seeing now in Honduras, right? It is possible to have reasonably robust both Honduras, they've got reasonably robust legal defenses. I think the social kind of local dynamic, they could have executed that a little bit more effectively from the beginning. But like, if you execute effectively on the social dynamic from the beginning, and there are reasonably robust legal defenses that you can also use that aren't a silver bullet, but right, like are enough, I think, to give, if the project is structured correctly, investors comfort to get it off the ground, to do cool stuff, and to hopefully um, create a better life for people.
Well, as you're talking, I just realized, would you consider Dubai a charter city?
Yeah, I sometimes call it a proto-charter city, right? Like Dubai, Singapore, Shenzhen, Hong Kong are all kind of proto-charter cities. Right? Like there's a joke, well, not Dubai, but like, right, the Saudi government is the world's largest family office, right? Like the UAE might be the world's, I don't know, fifth largest family office, third largest. So they do have and we do tend to
Well,
emphasize.
actually, wait, just real quickly, can you tell the listener what a family office is? I realize they might not know.
Yeah, so a family office is just like a offices that manages the money of a family. So usually this will be somebody like a high net worth individual, let's say Mark Zuckerberg. He has a lot of money. A lot of it's tied up in Facebook stock, but he sells some of it. And he says, all right, I'm going to have $1 billion that I want to manage. I'll spend, I don't know, 50 million, whatever, but 900 billion, 950 million that I want to manage. I will hire people to manage it. And I will tell them, this is my interest. I have like this level of risk tolerance. I have this level of preference in terms of stocks, bonds, startups, and then that office will manage the person's money. And the joke being, right, like Saudi Arabia, Dubai are governed by families, and the families functionally own a lot of the resources, whether it's land or oil, and they have a very comprehensive management body for those resources. Therefore, it's these are kind of the world's most successful family offices.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Dubai, is there's so United Arab Emirates is like, it used to be it's a bunch of Emirates, right?
Seven,
And yeah, and like Abu Dhabi is actually, I mean, it has like the oil.
yeah.
So Dubai doesn't have too much oil anymore at all. And so, they're specializing in different things. And so, they let Dubai do its thing because you can't go wild in Abu Dhabi, you know?
Yeah.
Dubai is the place that you go to go wild. And so that's it's that, they tolerate it, even though it's a conservative Muslim country, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the entire Middle East, right? Like the way to understand Dubai is basically a kind of like liberal, at least in the social sense, if not the kind of governing, like, right? Like the average resident has basically zero input to governance, but there's a lot of
Well,
social.
it's arguably you could argue that it's liberalish, but it's not democratic.
Yeah, yeah. So that's probably the distinction I'm trying to draw. But the point being, right, when the Middle East is going through this huge resource boom over the last 70 or so years, if you're a international company and you say, I want to open an office here, it's like, okay, I can go to Saudi Arabia, but we can't hire any women because the Saudis have very heavy restrictions on women in public life, right? You can go to Iran. Iran has a revolution, right? Lebanon has a civil war. Where do you end up? Dubai. Two, you have a lot of other, right, like regional kind of conflagrations where if you're in Iran and you're saying, I want to park my money somewhere safe, you're Russian, you want to park your money, right? Like you're Lebanese, you want to park your money, you want to go on vacation. So it was this kind of like liberal uh, uh, I mean, utopia might be too strong of a word, but that's the role that it's played quite successfully in terms of transforming itself. They had a little bit of oil wealth to help with infrastructure in the 50s and 60s, but now Dubai is basically self-sustaining as a tourist hub, as a financial hub, as a kind of, I don't know, consulting hub, largely based on the kind of wealth explosion in the region that resulted from hydrocarbons.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that, I'm thinking like I don't want to use buzzwords. Let's use a buzzword. It seems like charter cities would slot into like economic political context where you want to get synergies, right? Like look, if I want to go work in Mozambique, like unless you like have an in with the big man or whatever, with some corrupt politician, normal people would never want to go to Mozambique, whatever, even though there are resources and stuff. But if you had a charter city with rule of law, well, I think that would give an opportunity for people who don't want to deal with corruption to kind of interface with the resource set, with the people. It creates kind of, I don't want to say third space. I'm trying to like find a word, but you know what I'm trying to say, like a space for people that otherwise would not go there.
Yeah, I think that's it. And it also creates a space for locals to engage with the global market, right? Like if people want to increase their productivity, better education, all that good stuff, right? Like you need access to the global market, and the global market kind of has a mechanism by which it engages with different localities. And the problem is many localities don't have a effective, right? Like converter for that mechanism. Uh, so if you are a company and you want to go to Mozambique, yeah, like they've got a formal business registration process, but the actual process involves probably bribing some people, probably like right finding out who the actual power brokers are in a way that's very expensive and will scare off a lot of people and capital and talent. And if you can create a interface mechanism where it says, okay, you want to do business in Mozambique, we've got this area 10 square miles, we just are going to use approximately the same rules that Dubai uses for governing business. Come do business here, right? A lot of people then who might not otherwise come would go and do business there. So it is kind of this way to I don't know, right? Like flatten access, create a more like open, transparent system that kind of simplifies capital flows and investment. That I think, yeah, can really help a lot of places around the world.
So I have a random weird question because we've been kind of talking about obviously, look, you're the charter cities guy. You can talk about how charter cities are great. So there's that joke. You're an economist, right? You're trained as an economist, right? Well, it's like University of Chicago economists walking down the street and they see $100 bill, and there's like, well, I mean, someone would have taken it. That's not, that's not there. Well, I mean, okay, so why why are we this late? I mean, I know Shenzhen exists. Um, as you're laying it out, it seems like there should have been so many opportunities. Maybe I'll say after the Cold War's over. I mean, I'm just saying like in a Cold War context, I think charter cities might be a little bit of a problem. Uh, just because it would get caught in great power politics. But after 1990, why has it been so long for charter cities to start being a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two answers to that. One is coordination is harder than people think, right? One of the classic examples of this, they introduced the 3-point line in the NBA in what, like the early 80s? I don't know exactly when. And if you look at the shot patterns, right, they didn't really substantially change like 2015. So you basically have a 30 plus year period where a sport that has is worth, right? Like billions of dollars. I mean, Michael Jordan was one of the most, probably top three most like visible people on the world in the 90s. And it takes 20 years after that for them to optimize shooting patterns. Right? You're paying players tens of millions, you're paying coaches millions, you have everybody watching, and it takes that long to optimize. So obvious things aren't always as obvious as it might appear in retrospect. And then the second, I think, challenge is just it's a massive coordination problem, right? Because what you need to do is it's you need to go to a government, and the governments often have right a reason why they're not developed, not high income. And then two, you need to go to the government with enough capital or credible ability to raise capital that they take you seriously. You need to actually have a very clear economic strategy that says we need 10 square miles. We're going to have this development plan on these 10 square miles. So it is like, I mean, one way to think about it is just right, like in the search algorithm for the political space, space being defined as like new possible, some like distinct political entities. That search algorithm is very inefficient. And it requires a lot of elbow grease, a lot of putting these pieces together to actually like make it happen.
No, I mean that's that. To get from here to there is not trivial, right? You just like snap your fingers, and it takes time, and there's a lot more friction, I guess, as you economists would say, in a lot of these processes that are accounted for in your models, Horatio, right? But I just want to put it out there because it sounds great on paper, but like, how do you go from paper to reality? And how you go there is like, you got you as an executive director, and you're talking to people and trying to get stuff done, and once it gets done and once it succeeds, then it's going to be a lot easier, right? But there's always that beginning part of the curve before exponential growth. We're kind of in the beginning part, I feel, with charter cities. We've been talking about third world countries. Right now, as I'm recording, actually, I'm just gonna say I am in the great city of San Francisco, just on a business trip, and there's some massive governance issues here. I mean, understatement. I'm just saying that, but
Let's turn
yeah.
Presidio into a freedom city, baby.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, you can there is there's federal land. Was it like on the Presidio? What is that? There's that
So
area where like you can drink under 21.
yeah. So you can do that. So the let me give a little bit more context. So like basically 18 months ago, and we're recording this in December 2024, like 6 weeks after Trump's election, right? So 18 months ago, Trump released a 2-minute video on YouTube. You can Google it, where he talks about freedom cities. Um, and the idea is basically like sell federal land, have some degree of regulatory freedom, build 10 new cities. But it's just 2 minutes, so there's not a lot of detail there, right? And this was probably when Trump was at his weakest, right? It was before the primary. He was facing all of these lawsuits. People weren't paying that much attention, so it kind of got like lost in the shuffle. But it is a very powerful idea because the U.S. does have a lot of like regulatory sludge built up over time. Our drone industry is very weak in part because of government regulations. We don't build new nuclear plants because of government regulations, right? Like, takes a huge amount of money to develop a drug because of government regulations. And so it's not obvious in all of these what the right mechanism to unlock it is. But I think similar to how China needed special economic zones to liberalize given political constraints as well as just administrative constraints, I think freedom cities can play a similar role in liberalization in the US, given existing political constraints. And in practice, what this might look like, so Presidio is a former U.S. Naval base, research naval base. Um, Basically in San Francisco. It's where the Golden Gate Bridge hits San Francisco. It's 1,500 acres. So a lot of land, right? The total value of the land is probably $10 billion easily, just given San Francisco land is extremely valuable. It's federal land. It was created by the Presidio Trust Act, which I think was in the late 80s. When it was converted. And it basically appoints this board and says this board shall preserve Presidio and nature and all that fun stuff. So if the government passes a law that changes preserve to develop, right, and then fires the board or replaces the board or adds more board members, then the obligation of that board would be to develop Presidio. And it would not be hard to find private sector people who say, I want to build a house here. I want to build a apartment building here because the land is so valuable and housing is so expensive in San Francisco. There's also land in a former naval base in Alameda, which is across the bay from San Francisco, 600 acres that could be developed into an industrial site. Um, in Nevada, for example, 80% of land is federally owned. We're talking with somebody who's working on a new city project between San Antonio and Texas, and that's not federal land. But like, can you create a
Wait,
mechanism?
between San Antonio and
Oh,
Austin.
Austin, yeah, so Austin. Sorry, San Antonio
Sorry,
and Austin.
I do like to say Austin is just all of Texas, but still.
Uh, And that is not federal land, that's private, but like it would be possible to develop, if you pass legislation, to have a mechanism that allows private land to opt into Freedom City designation for some degree of regulatory freedom. And so this is right now, I think, a very high leverage idea that's somewhat unappreciated that I expect to spend a lot of my time on over the next 2 years before the midterm, seeing if we can make it a reality.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of unrelated. Well, no, it is kind of related to charter cities. So the indigenous peoples of North America have signed treaties with the British. Well, I mean, with Canada, but it was actually the British Empire, and then also with the United States. And they can do whatever, right? And so in British Columbia, in Vancouver, okay. So I'm gonna give some context because I have like something like 40% of the people that listen are not American. But there's analogs in other countries. Basically, what we have in America is these coastal cities that are very desirable to live in, are dominated by you know, incumbents, residents who use environmental protection laws to prevent development. And so, the YIMBY movement, yes, in my backyard, all of these are like mostly center left, but not all. Like some of them are libertarian conservative as well. They want to, create these like towers and more development, more infilling, and all these things. Well, I think it was in Vancouver. Some of the land in the city is owned by native tribes, like really prime land, right by downtown. And now they are proposing building, I mean, basically like massive skyscrapers that will loom over the downtown. And the incumbent, the local Vancouverites, these like socialists, are extremely angry that these indigenous people are ruining the character of their city because they took it from the indigenous people and they have created the character. I mean, I don't like what the Jews would call chutzpah. In my opinion, the way they're objecting, because it's just like you took their land, like, and now you're just like, what do you do with the land, right? But do we have that opportunity with because there are native like reservations or pieces of native land in certain parts of the country that are in urban areas, right?
Yeah, so there is some opportunity for that, and right, it's going to be a very kind of country level question. So in the U.S., Native American tribes, they tend to have exemption from most, if not all, of state level regs. So this is why you've got casinos in reservations, because casinos are regulated at the state level, and so the reservations are not part of that regulation. I've also seen recent media coverage that Trump is trying to build Tesla sales um floors or sale whatever places to sell Tesla. Elon is building places to sell Tesla in reservations because most states also have like requirements of car dealerships, which
Yeah.
are basically middlemen that take a large cut that is probably not inefficient in the modern car distribution network, a car distribution economy, but because of historical circumstance they wield a tremendous amount of political power, and Elon's trying to break that by distributing cars in Native American reservations. Um, in the U.S., Native American tribes have a very limited amount of federal autonomy. They're governed by the Department of Indian Affairs. The large tribes like the Sioux, the Navajo, have pretty sophisticated lobbying arms, so they might be able to carve out some degree of regulatory exemption. The smaller ones just don't because it is expensive to lobby the federal government. Um, as to what you can build and where, it tends to be a like where is the land and what does the tribe that owns the land want to do with it. So if you look outside of Phoenix, right, you could literally see where the tribal land starts because the development stops. And there it's I mean, that land is probably not desirable enough to build skyscrapers on, but you can build single family homes, maybe you can build row houses, right, et cetera. And there it's just you need a developer with expertise in building that who goes, meets with a lot of the tribes, even if they don't have lobbying arms, they'll still have reasonably sophisticated economic development arms that basically say, look, come to us with a value proposition. You want 100 acres to build homes. Show us proof of funds. Show us execution capability. We'll toss in the land at agreed upon valuation by a third party, right? So there are mechanisms to do that. I don't think we'll get anything as spectacular as what's happening in Vancouver because, to my knowledge, there's no Native American land that is quite as prime as that Vancouver land. Maybe there is, and I don't know about it. But it definitely is possible to leverage their degree of kind of legal autonomy for development, given a lot of kind of state level and city level restrictions on building.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier about, I use the example of Mozambique, whatever African country, developing countries, they need some order, some legal stability, and Charter City could provide that. I mean, I think Germans call it order liberalism or something, right? Just a framework, a legal framework to run, the market and have it be, people can believe in the enforceability of contracts and all these things. Okay, that makes sense. Like total anarchy. I'm sorry, Murray Rothbard. It's just there's some issues with it. Okay, so I don't want to get. Actually, I'm not. If you're a Rothbardian, like come at me, but whatever. Um, I know I have some listeners, like actually friends of mine who are. So
I believe
but
that.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. Mises Institute, get up, you can come at me, But anyway, um, so but when we're talking about the United States, we're talking about developed countries. The reason that I'm interested. I mean, I know the charter cities are like, okay, that's not that big of a deal here yet, but the problem in the United States, and to some extent, places like London, like England's got this problem. I think Canada does too. I think Canada does as well. Maybe Canada just has an immigration problem, but whatever. The issue is, you have localities that are well developed, and the problem is the legal system is almost too powerful. Uh, and so the legal system is used as a cudgel against flexibility, growth, and allowing for opportunity. It's the opposite problem that we have in the developing world, where there's not enough of a legal system. And I like, when you're talking about charter cities, like, I see, with the Presidio and stuff, I see an opportunity to kind of allow people not to have to deal with like all of the rules and regulations that slow everything down. Like it allows people to build. We just can't even build. We can't do anything. You can't open a business in San Francisco. It's like really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that freedom cities in the U.S. have the opportunity to get rid of a lot of like the bureaucratic sludge, both at a city level, right? Obviously, San Francisco doesn't want new housing; they don't want new businesses. Also, to some extent, on a national level, right? You can imagine kind of testing out variations of tort reform on a national level for different things. Like, can you use torts to enforce building codes instead of building codes? Right? Do you want a different tort system? Do you want to use torts to allow for kind of drug testing instead of having the FDA test it? Like if you want to go full Richard Hanania, do you want to exempt these areas from like parts of the Civil Rights Act? Do you want to like lower environmental requirements or offer different ways to meet those requirements in freedom cities? And so if we think about like what the Doge fight over the next few years is shaping up to be, right? Like that's I guess there's two elements. There's one is just like cutting spending. I'm fairly skeptical about the spending cuts just because the vast majority of that is entitlements and national defense, which have very strong political constituencies. The other that I am optimistic about is, let's just call it the like effectiveness, like capacity. Can you legalize IQ tests in hiring federal employees, right? Like, can you fire federal employees without going through, I'm making this up, like a 6 month process? It's right. If you look at, I think firing rates of federal employees are like an order of magnitude lower than private employees. Um, and that I think I am kind of optimistic that like that those don't have the same degree of political constituency. Not to say it's going to be easy, right? These fights are going to be extremely hard. And I see, yeah, like freedom cities as a way to potentially sidestep it. Let's get some wins. There can be bipartisan support, especially if you attach some like financing for national defense issues. You can get like you get 7, 8 blue senators. You can potentially get legislation around this in a way that's not a full frontal assault on the bureaucratic state, but kind of a way to say, look, let's try some experiments. Let's see what works. If it works, let's scale it up. If it doesn't work, all right, we don't need to do it, or we can just leave it in that weird part of the country that nobody cares about. So you've got these multiple elements, like just from low hanging fruit of converting kind of valuable federal land into housing, to perhaps like, right? I mean, with nuclear energy, it like, look, we've irradiated, I don't know, half of Nevada in the 50s and 60s, right? Like, why not just say, look, it's still federal land. If you want to do any nuke kind of power plant that has a different approval process from the NRC, just go over there. Worst case scenario, you irradiate that part of the world a little bit more, right? Like, so I think there are these things that might be able to get political support and might have kind of very high leverage in terms of kind of unlocking American dynamism.
Yeah, which, I love that idea. But, I'm gonna ask you, Mark, like, I'm sure there are people that are against charter cities and, what are their principled reasons? Not the rentier class reasons.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say what I think the best objections to charter cities are, rather than what the standard ones are, because the standard ones tend to be boring. The best objections, like, look, there is value in centralization. Like, the Roman Empire was centralized, and that was good. When the Roman Empire collapsed, there was a substantial decrease in the standard of living of everybody who was living in the previous Roman Empire. Right? Like solving collective action problems is very hard, and sometimes when you carve out an area, that creates a dynamic that might lead to less effective solving of collective action problems at the national level. Not 100%, but like that happens. The long term risk to charter cities is, or not risk, but like I would say a failure mode. If charter cities end up being kind of a dominant form of social organization, uh, and it looks like this, I would feel kind of bad. It's basically like let's call it the Dubai model or the Middle East model, where you basically have a very segregated, a very tiered system with relatively little economic mobility. That's kind of based on like country of origin or ethnicity or whatever, right? Where in Dubai, you've got 15-20% are basically Europeans or really like educated people from the global south. 10% or so are Emirati, and the rest are mostly like South Asians, some like Filipinos who occupy all the manual labor positions. And um, like, look, these jobs are better for the people than the jobs they would have back home. Like, I don't want to say it's a bad thing per se. Like people should be able to move to places where there are opportunity. But like on one margin, it does make me uncomfortable to imagine a future that just has like very little social mobility, like high social segregation. Like it's, I don't know. I do like kind of the bootstrappy story, making something of yourself, that degree of social cohesion that like risks getting undermined in a pure charter cities world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are basically it's interesting because Dubai is like a combination of, dynamism, but it's also very segregated. It's kind of a caste. The different ethnicities have the different peoples have their own place in the system. And they do their own thing. And the Emiratis are kind of they're like the Spartans or something, except they're like out of shape. Um, you know, they they're like the tiny minority that kind of like live as aristocrats. And then the Europeans are just like people from the West come in as mercenaries. I mean, I'm sure there's not going to be they don't live there as like multi-generational families. They come in, they work for 10, 15, 20 years, and then they go back to where they really like it. And then you have these South Asians that do the same thing, mostly South Asians, but as like laborer class people. It's advantageous to everybody. But I think for Americans, there's a little bit of an ick, right? The lack of egalitarianism there. But if you do have charter cities, if you do have different, you know, experiments, some of these are just not going to be congenial to you.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think there is uh, like some of the experiments are not going to be congenial, but there's also kind of like what the long term, let's say, economic equilibrium is, where like some experiments are going to be more economically efficient. I tend to, as an economist, I tend to think economics, right? Like people move to opportunity, et cetera. Like that will be a dominant force in what like social organization looks like. It's not the only force, but like economics plays a very important role in social organization. Um, and so look, yeah, if there are these like different places where you can choose US, you can choose Holland, you can choose Dubai, you can choose South Asia, great. If it's where kind of the Dubais are like the only example, and I don't think it's going to get there, but like that is kind of an extreme case that is arguably a like sustainable political equilibrium. Kind of these like walled, highly segregated cities with different predefined social classes where everything is super transactional, right? Like that is a possible like extreme outcome in terms of future social organization in like 100, 200 years. And like that is, yeah, I don't like that. That gives me the ick. And I don't know if that ick is just based on my predisposition of being an American and having these like whatever moral values. I don't know if it could be traced down deeper than that, but like that type it does make me feel uncomfortable, and it's not like a future that I would be excited to live in.
Well, I've talked to you a little bit about this, but like, tell the listener, like, what are you excited about in terms of the Charter City movement right now? Like, what's on your plate? Like, what are you trying to push through as the executive director of this organization? And kind of, I think of you as Charter City evangelist guy. So what's keeping you up at night in a positive way?
Yeah, I think we've historically focused a lot on Africa, and it's been kind of a long time there, and it feels like we're really starting to see some green shoots. We're organizing a conference, the Charter Cities Summit, June 12th, or no, New Cities Summit, June 12th and 13th in Nairobi. Last year we hosted a summit in Kigali, Rwanda, and we had 250 people. This year we're getting 500. Rendeavor, which is the most successful city builder in Africa, is interested in sponsoring, and their chairman, who was on Tyler Cowen's podcast, is going to come keynote. So we're really building kind of hopefully a machine that can build multiple cities, and what that machine is several dimensions, right? It's one, we have an accelerator. We're running the accelerator for the second time called Catapult, getting kind of early stage charter city and adjacent projects through so we can create a pipeline. Two, we get the development finance institutions like African Export Import Bank, African Development Bank, et cetera, to sponsor because they're looking for deal flow. Three, we get the service providers, construction companies, concrete companies, um, uh, investment promotion companies, et cetera, to come, right? And this creates this basically, hopefully, a self-fulfilling development flywheel where the more projects you get, the more capital you get, the more political buy-in you get, that actually leads to sustainable development in Africa, or at least kind of major regions of Africa that over the next few decades can lift tens of millions of people out of poverty. So that's one thing that's pretty exciting. Two is recently started working a little bit in India with a local group, the Foundation for Economic Development, and they've passed legislation for a special economic zone that's 30,000 hectares, so 75,000 acres, so like twice the physical land mass of San Francisco in Uttar Pradesh. And they're kind of figuring out how to implement it. What does it actually look like to create this municipal authority? How do you get, right, the laws at the state level in India? How do you get federal level buy-in? What does that look like? Um, and there, I think if this is executed well, this could increase India's economic growth rate by half a percentage point a year over a multi-decade time horizon, potentially even more than that, right? And so that just
Well,
has,
really quickly, I want to jump in. Like, from a utilitarian calculus, that is important because this is the most populous country in the world. We're talking billions of people.
uh,
Go on.
yeah, and so that's just really exciting because it feels like it's super high leverage, um, and really enjoy working with the team. Started working in Central Asia recently as well with a strong local partner. Can't talk too much about that project, but the early conversations that the partner has been having with the government have been quite positive. Working in Argentina, where Mile, a local partner, right, working on legislation that might have a chance of passing because it's Mile. We're also, my nonprofit has opened the Africa Urban Lab, which is kind of an urban research center in Zanzibar. We're partnered with the African School of Economics, right? And the idea here is kind of like train the next generation of elites doing anything related to urban stuff, whether it's being a mayor, an urban planner, being a developer, right? You get that elite network built in East Africa, hopefully beyond. It becomes much easier once everybody has a shared model for development, like what works, what doesn't work. You have that network and you can kind of build much more effectively these systems for attracting investment, creating jobs, economic growth. And then lastly, we've already discussed it a bit, but yeah, the Freedom City stuff kind of came out of left field. Was not expecting to do much work in the United States, and we've had a lot of pretty strong early interest in Freedom Cities. We're partnering with the Frontier Foundation to make it a reality. So we see kind of three work streams there. One is federal, which is going to be both executive as well as legislative. Two is PR, just like how do we meme this idea into existence. And three is project, where it's both people working on new cities, states that want freedom cities, as well as local nonprofits that have access to kind of state reps or local media that we can engage to really help push these ideas. And this kind of try approach, right? We've got very tight window in terms of 18 months, but I think if we hit it hard, we've got a decent chance of getting some substantive legislation through, or at least an executive order that can hopefully really materially change how federal land is used, how innovation happens in the U.S. in a way that could be really exciting.
Well, it's been great talking to you. We covered, talk about the history, the past, the present, and it's like a good preview of the future. This is one of those I mean, most of my podcasts are evergreen. They're not really, hooked to the news. I do have to say though, I am convinced that I definitely cannot sit on this in a year because a lot will have changed. It seems like stuff is happening, and I'm excited about it. And this is one of those things where, look, like let's say you're full of crap. Let's just say you are. It's not like this is like a national election or something like that. It's not that high stakes where people need to be scared. Like let's just like let it play out. See if it works some places. It doesn't work in other places. I think this is one of those, I don't want to say small bet, but it's one of those bets that we can absorb, and the upside is high. In my opinion, I think obviously in your opinion, I hope the people who listen get a sense of what we're talking about here, because national economic development, some of these things like Shenzhen was, like you said, it was like a bunch of villages. You know, things can start really small and then they compound. You used the word compound earlier, and you're an economist, you know what that means, but compounding growth, compounding cultural changes, can really, really start from just a single foundation. I think what you're trying to do with charter cities is establish that, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, it was great talking to you, Mark. I will see you around as usual. And, I hope the people enjoyed this conversation, and maybe some of the listeners will be able to check out a charter city soon themselves.
Cool. Thanks. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's Mark Lutter, MarkLutter. And my email is mark@cci.city. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'll put those in the show notes for the listeners, by the way, who, don't want to rewind and listen to Mark say that again. All right. Take it easy, bro.
All right. See ya.
This podcast for kids